Back when I first got Shadows of Doubt, the game was so buggy that I was never able to play on a single file for more than one sitting. I think I solved a murder once, but I was essentially restarting every time I sat down to play. That was nearly a year ago at this point, but I started playing again recently now that the game has reached some semblance of stability, as in I can at least load a game without it crashing and haven't run into a game-breaking bug yet. Fingers crossed. Being able to solve multiple crimes on the same character has made me realize that there is an entire dimension to the gameplay I'd been missing. You play as a detective with a photographic memory. When you learn what someone's fingerprint looks like, you can instantly recognize it weeks later on some random table in a restaurant. So, as you play, your character starts to become essentially a living, breathing encyclopedia on the world around you. Combined with how you as a player will eventually learn the general layout of the city and the specific layouts of things like streets, buildings, restaurants, and potentially even some apartments, the world and its inhabitants slowly go from new and interesting to old and lame. This video is about how that inevitable staleness isn't just a problem for keeping the player engaged, but a fundamental gameplay problem, and how the solution to that problem in the game is a teeny tiny bit of a hack job, but it's one where I completely understand why it's a hack job. Doing it the way I've thought of, which we'll get to, would be kinda insane, but also kinda cool. We'll get there when we get there, but for now, some basics. In Shadows of Doubt, you solve cases literally by picking up a form, filling in information, and submitting it to the city hall. Someone gets murdered, all you need to know is the name of the killer. Someone gets kidnapped? Once again, you just need the name of the kidnapper. Oddly enough, it doesn't even matter if the person who got kidnapped survives. You get a monetary penalty if they die, but it's not enough to really matter. Living in Shadows of Doubt is actually absurdly cheap. You need food and drinks, but you can go forever without sleeping. So having a place to live is more of a luxury than a necessity. In other words, money isn't that important. The typical structure of solving one of these cases has 3 major steps. Step 1 is to visit the scene of the crime, and then find some kind of clues, either information about the criminal or the victim, that you can use as a starting point for your investigation. Then step 2 is really the bulk of the game. Here, you use that limited information from the crime scene to fill in gaps in your knowledge until you know for sure who did it. And step 3 is simply submit your results and get paid. So now, here's the problem. Imagine this hypothetical detective who's learned every detail about every citizen. If the crime scene contained any information about the criminal at all, they could quickly or instantly know beyond any shadows of doubt who the criminal is. Essentially, you'd make step 2 instant, or at least near instant. If you had to keep your own notes, like on pen and paper, this wouldn't be too big of a problem, since you'd have to be a very thorough sort of person to save every tiny scrap of information, even if it wasn't relevant to what you were doing. But because the game saves what you learn about everyone automatically, if you play long enough, you just can't help turning into an all-knowing super detective. And it's sort of an unavoidable problem given that the world is somewhat static in nature. The people in a city never change, and because cities are not only not infinite, but are frankly tiny compared to real-life cities, you're going to run out of content sooner or later. If you play long enough, or if you're just thorough enough, then it's an absolute certainty that you will reach a point where there's nothing left for your detective to really detect. The game has 2 systems to fight against this inevitable march towards the death of fun, and the kicker is that they're both the same thing, actually. The first being that you can just generate a brand new city whenever you want. Just start a new game from a clean slate, that way you can be given a case where you know for sure that you won't already have the clues you need. In fact, given the nature of the game, I almost wouldn't be surprised if a sizable chunk of players start a new game every time they solve their first big case. Sure, if you stick with a single detective long enough, you can collect perks from sync discs and get money to buy a nice apartment, but those things ultimately don't make a ton of difference to the gameplay, so if you're playing just for the fun of solving crimes, starting from scratch often makes a lot of sense. The second way the game pushes players away from simply learning everything about the city is that even if you do decide you're in for the long haul and you're going to keep solving cases as the same detective in the same city, you eventually unlock the ability to retire, which is the equivalent of winning the game. There's this mechanic called the social credit system. It's basically a way for your character to level up by solving crimes. You even get perks at every level. And when the bar fills up to the top, you unlock the ability to fill out a form that lets you retire. Doing this just straight up ends the game, so basically it's the same as making a new city, except here you get a pat on the back for a job well done. Nice. Now personally, I can't help but feel like just start over and do it again is a kind of awkward solution to the all-knowing super detective problem. The developers knew that playing too long in a city would get stale, so they added an arbitrary bar that fills up when you solve cases. Fill the bar and win. For a game as mechanically interesting as Shadows of Doubt, it's sort of lame that they measure your success on the same bar used in a test your strength machine. So I figured there must be a better way, or at least a more mechanically interesting way, to avoid the city and its inhabitants becoming too stale after you play too long. And so I've given it a little bit of thought, and I've had an idea that feels so obvious that it's almost strange that it isn't in the game. It's something that would be more mechanically unique, would provide a heck of a lot more room for emergent storytelling, and would make this already very technically impressive game even more impressive. Now, trust me, I know a thing or two about how work-intensive game development is, and I'm fully aware that what I'm about to describe would be so much effort to actually put in the game, while also not destroying the player's ability to solve crimes. So I get why it isn't like this, but hold off on that feeling and just take a moment with me to imagine how much cooler this already very, very cool game could be. Here we go. In real life, if you've lived in the same place for long enough, you know that nothing really stays the same. Nothing truly lasts forever. People move, new shops open up, places you used to love close down or change, and when you're very familiar with a place, you can even pick up on some pretty subtle changes, like even a restaurant you always go to just getting new plates. As far as I'm aware, no game truly evokes that feeling, that tiny feeling of loss when something familiar to you goes away. But with a little work, Shadows of Doubt could, and I think it would fit incredibly well with the overall vibe of the game. Imagine if the cities the game generated weren't so unchanging. If new people could move in or out of the city, or apartments got renovated so the furniture layouts change, or businesses could close and eventually be replaced by something new. Or even if your favorite restaurant in the city just got some new decor one day. If cities changed over time, even an all-knowing super detective would have to continually learn new stuff to stay an all-knowing super detective. And that's a good thing because, as I've said before, the entire gameplay loop is centered around collecting information. If there's always new information, there's always new gameplay. If changes occurred fast enough, you could theoretically play forever in a single city because that city would be dynamically Ship of Theseusing itself in real time. After a long enough time, a city could look almost unrecognizable from when it was first generated. I don't know about you, but that idea sounds so cool to me. Like, cool enough that even though I don't think we're ever getting a Shadows of Doubt 2, I think you could sell a sequel with this concept as the major selling point. If anyone knows any sandboxy type games where the world actually does dynamically evolve over time, I'd be very interested. I don't think any exist, but I'd love to be surprised, so leave a comment if you know about something like that, and what you think about my idea. So that's the broad strokes concept of my idea. Hopefully the benefits are obvious, but if you aren't sold, I figured we could go through some specifics on how the moment-to-moment gameplay would be more interesting with a less static world. For starters, we've essentially solved the problem of being able to go to a crime scene and instantly ID the criminal from fingerprints. If new people are moving in and out of the city, then having a complete encyclopedic knowledge on everybody just wouldn't be a practical solution. You still could happen to go to the scene of a murder and recognize the fingerprints of the murderer right away, but it would be much less likely. In fact, just letting new people move into the city alone would be 90% of the way to fixing the problem that I've been describing. There is kinda lore that justifies people not being able to move from one city to another, but frankly, you could just change the lore to accommodate letting people move because it would be such an improvement to the gameplay. Rather than just letting citizens move in and out of cities, letting the facts about citizens change over time would go a long way in terms of adding realism, and also adding some variety to the investigation process. Imagine you're tracking someone down by visiting the restaurant they work at, only to discover that they've changed jobs. Or maybe you've broken into someone's apartment to search for clues and you want to go back a second time, only to find it vacant. They've moved to someplace new in the city because they were uncomfortable staying after the break-in. Even if people decided to move to a different place in the city completely randomly, it would still lead to gameplay variety. Hey, just cutting in to say, oops, apparently citizens can move to another place in the city. I came across this conversation in City Hall where somebody says it. I don't know. I guess that can happen, neat, but I still think it should happen more. Going down the list of data you have about each person, really the only things you couldn't reasonably come up with an excuse to change would be fingerprints, date of birth, and blood type. Given that a sync disk exists that lets you change your height, I'm assuming changing all other aspects of appearance wouldn't be too out of the question. And the more details you allow to change, the more potential there is for the player to have a new little wrinkle of depth in their investigation. And the less likely it becomes that solving a murder becomes so straightforward as to be entirely uninteresting. It's really all about variety, and making the city dynamic adds the potential for tons of it. And thanks for watching is what I'd say if this video was over, but I decided to put my idea to the test. I wanted to check just to make sure the gameplay did actually become as simple as I was expecting when you knew everyone in the city, and so I started a new small city and listed everyone here in the aptly named Case for the Missing Knowledge. Frankly, this was easy to put together. In only 3.5 hours from starting a new game, I have a full list of basically everyone in the city. I say basically because I'm not absolutely certain I have every homeless citizen, but I do have at least a partial list of them, and I definitely have every single person with a house, which seems to be the vast majority. To be clear, listing out all the citizens on the caseboard like this isn't even necessary, I just did it for the visual. In fact, I wouldn't recommend making a list like this at all. The game window stops responding for a few seconds half the time I open up this menu, and this is only a small city. Doing this in a bigger city might just straight up crash your game. Now, I said it was easy to get all this data together, but it was tedious. The process was as simple as making a list of everyone in the city directory, and then printing out the data on each of those citizens from the government database on a computer that somebody forgot to log out of in the City Hall building. To be fair, it would have been probably like twice as fast if I wasn't alphabetizing every citizen on my caseboard, but it is what it is. I didn't fully complete every citizen profile either, for the record, but the info on the government database seems to be all the best stuff, the greatest hits of crime-solving knowledge. In fact, it really is a wonder the police can't solve these crimes themselves. All I really need is one of these little fingerprint scanners I've got, and I think I'd be out of the job. But hey, keep it on the DL, cause I'm getting easy money until they figure that out. Anyways, I'm getting a little off track now. I didn't get it on recording, but I was able to solve my first case exactly as I expected. I visited the crime scene, found a fingerprint on a business card left by the killer, and was immediately able to identify Rose Bird as the culprit. I did get my second murder case on recording. I was trying to go extra fast for the video, so I actually ended up making a mistake. I went all the way up to the 15th floor where the murder happened, snuck in, got the fingerprint that I needed, and went all the way back to City Hall, and it said I was wrong, and so at that point I was thinking, like, this sucks, because it totally does not prove my point at all. In fact, it does the exact opposite, but what happened was I just misspelled the name, so I went all the way back up there to get the fingerprint again, to double check, and yeah, I missed an N at the end of the name, so my bad. Anyways, like I said earlier, even if you actually played the game the intended way, instead of doing it in this tedious but very quick and easy way, you'd still eventually reach a point where you have this level of data on more or less everyone. So I think that proves my point. And so yeah, I guess the video can end here for real this time. See you later. Hi, hello. Also, thanks to, like, the people who subscribed. I wasn't expecting anybody to watch my first video, so, yeah. Thanks. Hi. See you later.